Have you ever been in a room where every eye feels like it's burning into you, every whisper slicing through the air like a knife, and yet you're expected to smile and stay composed? That was Meghan Markle at Kris Jenner's 70th birthday party. Imagine stepping into a mansion that's been designed to dazzle, where the walls themselves seem to hum with power and influence, only to find yourself the center of a silent storm that you didn't even see brewing. Meghan had been invited alongside Prince Harry, a royal couple now no strangers to the glare of cameras and the burden of public scrutiny. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared her for what awaited inside that glittering Hollywood fortress. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. From the outside, the world saw a glamorous celebration: sparkling gowns, crystal chandeliers, cameras flashing in a synchronized rhythm, celebrities mingling like peacocks showing off their brightest feathers. But behind the velvet ropes and the champagne towers, a tense narrative was quietly unfolding, one that would see Meghan's composure tested in ways few could imagine. You see, Kris Jenner isn't just a reality TV mogul. She's a strategist, a master manipulator of optics, a woman who knows exactly how to control a room without lifting her voice. And that night, her target was unmistakably Meghan Markle. When Meghan first arrived, she did so with the poise of a duchess, the kind of grace that has been honed under the relentless spotlight of royal life. But here, the rules of engagement were different. This was Hollywood, where charm is currency, and social hierarchies are invisible but strictly enforced. Every movement she made was observed, every smile scrutinized, and among the guests, there were whispers, subtle, yet piercing. Is she really used to this level of attention? Someone asked, almost rhetorically. Meghan could feel the shift in energy. The room, which moments before had been a celebration, now felt like a stage, and she had been cast without her consent. Prince Harry, ever vigilant, noticed it first. His eyes scanned the room as though reading invisible currents of tension, the subtle cues that the human eye can detect when social power dynamics are in flux. He had been through countless events, both royal and public, but this was different. There was an edge to the atmosphere, a carefully constructed tension that could snap at any moment. And Meghan, standing by his side, looked radiant. But behind that perfect smile, there was an unmistakable awareness. She knew the storm had already begun. And then it happened. Kris Jenner approached, her smile sharp and precise, carrying the kind of confidence that only someone used to commanding rooms can wield. And with a single, calculated phrase, she struck. "You can't sit with us." The words were simple, deceptively casual, almost playful if taken out of context. But in that moment, the room seemed to shrink around Meghan. The elegance of her entrance, the poise she had maintained, the years of mastering composure under pressure, all of it was suddenly irrelevant. The words weren't just a joke. They were a challenge, a public test of dominance, and they carried the weight of humiliation. Imagine being Meghan in that instant. Your gaze meets a room of Hollywood elites, many of whom know exactly how to read power and social cues. The cameras are still flashing, and you realize that this moment is not private. Every reaction, every small smirk, every raised eyebrow is being cataloged by the people who make or break reputations. In a world where image is everything, a moment like this can ripple far beyond the confines of a single evening. And as Meghan's lips pressed into a thin line, a question formed in her mind. Was this mere jest, or a calculated display meant to assert dominance and unsettle her? It wasn't just the words themselves, it was the way they landed. The cadence, the timing, the casual delivery, all choreographed for maximum effect. If you've ever felt the sting of exclusion, the sudden awareness that you are an outsider, then you know how quickly it can translate into a physical sensation. A tightening in your chest, a rush of adrenaline, the fleeting thought of wanting to leave before anyone can witness your reaction. And Meghan, no stranger to scrutiny, felt it all at once. The reactions around her were equally telling. Guests who had been chatting and laughing just moments before fell silent for a beat, unsure of whether to laugh, look away, or intervene. Cameras continued to click, but there was now a different energy in the air, a tension that even the glittering decor could not mask. And Harry, noticing the subtle shifts, whispered something, a protective instinct that had been honed over years of navigating public life. But Meghan, even in that protective shadow, realized that this wasn't a moment to be soothed. This was a moment that demanded choice, demanded action. How did she respond? How does one respond when the world's eyes are fixed upon them? When a single phrase has the power to redefine perception in real time? Meghan's mind raced, processing options, weighing dignity against the raw sting of public mockery. Every detail mattered. The sound of laughter that followed Kris's words, the way the room's attention pivoted, the subtle glances exchanged between onlookers. And through it all, a quiet, simmering fury began to take hold. The kind that doesn't explode immediately but builds, a slow burn that promises inevitable action. But what makes this story even more compelling isn't just the moment itself. It's the context surrounding it. Kris Jenner's birthday party was not merely a celebration. It was a convergence of Hollywood's most powerful personalities, a playground where influence is currency and social missteps can become legends. Meghan and Harry were entering a world where reputations are constructed and deconstructed with every smile, every whisper, every carefully posed photograph. And in this environment, Kris Jenner knew exactly how to manipulate the narrative, how to position herself, how to frame Meghan as the outsider, and how to ensure that the cameras captured every nuance. And yet, there's more to this story than just social dynamics. There are layers of tension rooted in public perception, media narratives, and personal histories. Meghan, after all, is not only a former actress but also a duchess, a woman who has navigated the intense scrutiny of royal life and media speculation. Prince Harry, by her side, carries the weight of both his family's legacy and the relentless curiosity of the public. The collision of Hollywood spectacle and royal scrutiny creates a pressure cooker environment where every action is amplified, every reaction analyzed, and every misstep remembered. By the time Meghan realized the full weight of Kris Jenner's words, the room had shifted irrevocably. Allies and observers alike understood this was not a harmless quip. This was a calculated assertion of control, a subtle but unmistakable signal. You are not one of us. And the implications were immediate. Every step Meghan took from that moment forward was scrutinized. Every glance she cast measured against the expectations of both Hollywood and royal etiquette. And the tension didn't stop there. As Meghan processed the insult, the whispers in the room grew louder. Guests exchanged knowing looks, some discreetly smirking, others carefully neutral, as though waiting to see how the Duchess would respond. Prince Harry's protective presence was palpable, but even he recognized the delicate balance. Intervene too openly, and the drama escalates. Remain passive, and Meghan bears the full weight of public judgment. It's a situation almost impossible to navigate, a high-stakes social chess game, played under the glare of both literal and figurative spotlights. So now, imagine yourself in Meghan's shoes. Every detail matters. The glittering chandeliers, the carefully curated music, the smell of gourmet dishes wafting through the air, the flash of cameras capturing every movement, and the unspoken rules of Hollywood power. And in this meticulously crafted environment, a single phrase cuts sharper than any blade. You can't sit with us. It's an exclusion, a challenge, a public judgment, and it lands perfectly. But what makes this story even more captivating is what came after. Because Meghan's reaction, while private in that first instant, set off a chain of events that would ripple through the night, the media, and public discourse for days to come. Her anger wasn't just emotional. It was strategic. And Harry's response, protective, loyal, but constrained by social norms, added another layer of complexity. The stage was set for a confrontation that no one anticipated, a series of social and emotional moves that would leave the entire party and the world talking. And yet, even as Meghan's fury simmered and Harry assessed the room, there was another layer lurking beneath the surface. The media, the cameras, the ever-present eyes of social media audiences. Every movement, every micro-expression, every hesitation would be captured, analyzed, and dissected. The night was no longer just a birthday celebration. It had become a spectacle, a high-profile drama unfolding in real time. And for Meghan, the stakes were nothing less than reputation, dignity, and the delicate balance of power between Hollywood and royalty. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever walked into a room where the air itself seems charged, where every whisper carries weight, and every gaze feels like a spotlight? That was Meghan Markle as she and Prince Harry made their way toward Kris Jenner's mansion that evening. At first glance, the party looked like any other celebrity gathering. Red carpets, crystal chandeliers, velvet ropes, flashes of paparazzi cameras, and the distant hum of champagne pouring into waiting glasses. But nothing about this night was ordinary. From the moment they arrived, Meghan and Harry were not just guests. They were anomalies. Royalty in a world defined by Hollywood glam, social clout, and meticulously curated image. Every step they took was scrutinized, every movement calculated, and yet, no one could have anticipated just how tightly the room's energy would constrict around them. As they approached the entrance, Meghan's eyes flicked across familiar faces. A-list actors laughing in rehearsed casualness, media moguls nodding politely, and influencers documenting every moment for their followers. But amidst the glamour, there was an undercurrent, a subtle, almost imperceptible tension. Something had shifted before they even walked through the door. You could feel it, could you? Imagine being in Meghan's shoes. You are accustomed to scrutiny, but scrutiny in this environment carries an entirely different weight. It's not just public perception, it's personal power. Prince Harry, as ever, remained vigilant. His gaze swept the crowd, scanning for subtle cues, a sideways glance here, a whispered comment there, the quiet calculations of a room filled with people who spend their lives competing for influence. Harry had navigated public scrutiny for years, but Hollywood's hierarchy was unfamiliar territory. The stakes were different. The rules were invisible, and every slight, every social maneuver, could echo far beyond the confines of the mansion. As Meghan adjusted the hem of her gown, the cameras caught the slight shift in her expression. A brief flash of awareness, a subtle tightening around the eyes that spoke volumes. Harry noticed. His hand hovered lightly at her back, an instinctive gesture of support. But Meghan was not the type to rely solely on protection. She had navigated the royal spotlight, endured relentless media scrutiny, and emerged stronger each time. And yet, in this moment, even she could feel the weight of invisible scrutiny, the calculated glances of powerful people sizing her up before she had even stepped inside. The valet doors opened with a flourish, revealing a scene straight from a Hollywood dream. Marble floors gleaming under chandelier light, artfully arranged flowers, and servers moving silently like shadows, carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Music floated through the air, the kind carefully selected to evoke elegance and subtle social energy. And at the center of it all, Kris Jenner stood, poised, perfect, and perfectly aware of every eye in the room. She radiated control, the kind that doesn't need volume to command attention. And she was watching them, Meghan and Harry, as if she had been expecting them all along. The moment Meghan and Harry stepped onto the carpet, a ripple went through the crowd. Some people smiled politely, some nodded with a practiced air of acknowledgement, others stared, some in admiration, some in appraisal, some in barely disguised judgment. There was a subtle but unmistakable energy in the room, a test silently being administered. Who would falter? Who would assert dominance? And who would stand their ground? You could see it in the way Meghan carried herself. Her posture straight, her smile measured but genuine. She understood the rules. She understood the stakes. And yet, she knew instinctively that Hollywood is a world where charm can be a weapon, where a seemingly small gesture can be magnified into a headline. How would you respond if you were in her shoes? A glance, a whisper, a smirk. These could define you in a matter of minutes. And the cameras, relentless as ever, were already documenting every microexpression. Harry, meanwhile, was calculating, not just for the cameras, but for the dynamics of the room. He had seen enough of public life to know that power can be subtle. He watched interactions, noting alliances, gauging reactions, understanding how Meghan might be perceived. And he realized that even small nuances, a tilt of the head, a casual laugh, a slight hesitation, could tip the balance in ways that no one outside this room could comprehend. The first few minutes were a delicate dance. Meghan engaged politely with other guests, exchanging pleasantries with A-list celebrities, nodding at familiar faces, and stepping around subtle social landmines that could trip her up in an instant. Harry stayed close, offering a comforting presence, but allowing Meghan to navigate the room on her terms. Every smile, every nod, every carefully measured laugh was under scrutiny. And in that scrutiny lay the tension, the kind that can transform a celebratory gathering into a high-stakes battlefield without anyone realizing it. And then the whispers started. Not loud, not overt, just enough to be noticed. A slight tilt of a head, a barely perceptible smile exchanged between two guests. The kind of communication that passes under the radar of most, but not under Meghan's trained observation. It was subtle, yet the message was unmistakable. You are being watched. You are being evaluated. And you are being judged. At that moment, the cameras captured something almost imperceptible. A flicker across Meghan's face, an eyebrow slightly raised, lips pressed into a thin line. It was enough to convey that she noticed, that she understood, that she was already assessing how to respond. Harry noticed it too, and a flash of concern crossed his face. He knew that Meghan's reaction in these first minutes could set the tone for the rest of the night, influencing perception, shaping narratives, and affecting how every interaction would be interpreted in both Hollywood and the royal sphere. Kris Jenner, ever strategic, observed this exchange with an almost imperceptible smirk. She knew the power of first impressions, the psychological weight of entrance, and the subtle art of social hierarchy. In a room filled with celebrities, socialites, and influencers, the dynamics of inclusion and exclusion are carefully monitored. And Kris understood that by positioning herself as both host and arbiter, she could subtly control the room's perception of Meghan before a word was even spoken. It's at this point that the dynamics shifted in ways that no one outside the room could anticipate. What started as polite greetings and subtle social positioning quickly escalated into a psychological game of power and influence. Every gesture mattered. Every glance carried meaning. Meghan, despite her poise and experience, could feel the tension building, a quiet storm forming behind the sparkle and celebration. And Harry, attuned to her cues, understood that the night was about to take a turn that neither of them had expected. And as the first champagne flutes were poured and the evening formally began, a question lingered in the air, heavy and unspoken. Who would assert dominance, and at what cost? In a room where every move is analyzed, every expression cataloged, and every interaction has the potential to be turned into a headline, the stakes couldn't have been higher. Meghan had navigated scrutiny before, but this was different. This was Hollywood, and Hollywood operates by rules that are invisible yet mercilessly enforced. By the time they reached the main hall, Meghan was aware of every whisper, every look, every subtle shift in energy. The room, which moments ago had seemed welcoming, now felt like a minefield. And in that charged environment, Kris Jenner made her move. A smile, a tilt of the head, a step closer, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Meghan and Harry had arrived, but the real test of the evening was only just beginning. And that's when the words were spoken. Simple, casual, but with a precision that cut through the room like a scalpel. You can't sit with us. Have you ever walked into a room where every detail seems meticulously designed to impress, intimidate, and assert control all at once? That was the world Meghan Markle and Prince Harry stepped into that evening. Kris Jenner's mansion was a spectacle of wealth, style, and carefully curated power. Every chandelier, every floral arrangement, every golden accent seemed to whisper the same message. This is a kingdom, and Kris is queen. But the true architecture of the night wasn't in the marble floors or sparkling glassware. It was in the invisible currents of social influence, the unspoken rules, the alliances and subtle rivalries that shaped every interaction. From the moment Meghan and Harry walked into the main hall, it became obvious that this wasn't just a birthday party. It was a theater of social dominance. The layout alone spoke volumes. Long tables draped in white linens with carefully arranged centerpieces indicated seating hierarchies. VIP areas were cordoned off subtly, almost invisibly, but unmistakable to anyone who understood the language of power in elite gatherings. There were clusters of guests in corners, some laughing lightly, while others stood slightly apart, observing. The room was alive with unspoken negotiations, glances, smiles, nods, each one a signal, a test, or a challenge. The music hummed softly in the background, carefully chosen to maintain a mood of elegance while signaling exclusivity. A jazz quartet played in one corner, unobtrusive yet assertive, their notes floating like invisible threads tying the room together. But beneath the surface melody, there was tension. Every note seemed to underscore the unspoken message. Only those who belong here can fully participate. And for Meghan, that message hit immediately. She had entered this world as a guest, yet the invisible currents made it clear she was under scrutiny. The guests themselves were a microcosm of power dynamics. Hollywood A-listers, industry moguls, influencers with millions of followers. All were actors in a play orchestrated by Kris Jenner, who observed with the calm calculation of a strategist. Some guests greeted Meghan politely, their smiles practiced. Others studied her subtly, trying to assess how royalty would navigate their world, how someone from a completely different sphere might react to their subtle tests. And all the while, cameras captured it all, flashes punctuating every glance, every whispered conversation. You could feel the room adjusting itself around Meghan and Harry. People shifted positions, some drew closer to Kris as if seeking her approval, while others lingered near the edges, content to watch the unfolding drama. The way someone stood, the angle of a hand, the timing of a laugh. All these small details became magnified in the charged atmosphere. And in a place like this, Meghan quickly realized, social missteps are not forgiven. They are amplified. As Meghan moved through the crowd, she encountered both polite acknowledgement and subtle dismissal. Some guests approached with genuine curiosity, asking about her projects, complimenting her attire, making conversation. Others, however, offered smiles that were too quick, too measured, their eyes betraying amusement at her royal presence. A subtle reminder that while she had titles, they had influence. Every interaction was layered with contradiction. How does one navigate respect and scrutiny at the same time? How do you remain composed when those around you are watching for the slightest crack in your confidence? Harry's presence was a stabilizing force, but he too was attuned to the intricacies of the room. He noticed clusters of whispering guests, the quick exchanges that weren't meant to be overheard but carried meaning nonetheless. He observed the subtle power plays, the ways in which Hollywood elites jockey for position not through overt conflict but through influence, charm, and calculated gestures. And he knew Meghan would notice, too. Her training as a royal had honed her awareness to the point where she could read both the spoken and unspoken language of such gatherings. The tension escalated further when the first group of toasts began. Champagne flutes raised, smiles wide. Yet underneath the surface, there was an edge. Toasts were not merely celebratory. They were performative declarations of status. Every word was chosen to convey charm, influence, and connection. And the reactions were equally calculated: laughter, nods, subtle gestures of acknowledgement. Meghan and Harry stood as observers as much as participants, watching the nuanced power dynamics at play. Yet the most critical element of the evening was still invisible: Kris Jenner herself. She navigated the room with the precision of a conductor, guiding attention, controlling energy, and strategically placing herself in interactions to maximize impact. She knew exactly who would notice what and when. Her influence extended far beyond her words. It was in her presence, her gaze, her timing. And Meghan could feel it. The atmosphere was suffocating in its subtlety, a carefully orchestrated pressure cooker of social tension. What made the night even more charged was the contradiction inherent in Meghan's position. On one hand, she had the unmistakable status of a royal, a figure who commands global attention and respect. On the other hand, she was in a domain that measured power differently, through social currency, Hollywood savvy, and visibility. And in this collision of worlds, even Meghan's poise was tested. Every smile, every nod, every small gesture was scrutinized not just by the guests, but by the unblinking eyes of the media. As the night progressed, the whispers grew more pronounced. A guest here, an influencer there, a subtle tilt of the head, all signals that Meghan's presence was being evaluated. The room itself seemed to pulse with this invisible energy, shifting imperceptibly but unmistakably around her. She noticed the small smirks exchanged when she greeted certain guests, the subtle redirection of attention, the almost imperceptible cues that suggested she was an outsider, an observer rather than a participant in the social game. And then there was the subtle choreography of seating. The main table, arranged with careful intention, revealed hierarchy through proximity, orientation, and composition. Some guests were strategically placed to impress, others to assert dominance, and the rest to observe. Meghan's position was intentionally ambiguous, neither fully integrated nor completely excluded, a deliberate placement that communicated more than words could convey. Every glance toward that table was a reminder. Inclusion in this world is earned, not given. At that moment, the tension between the visible spectacle and invisible power dynamics was palpable. Meghan and Harry were acutely aware of the delicate balance required. Step too far, and you risk alienation. Step too close, and you risk offense. Every gesture became a negotiation, every smile a strategic choice. And while the guests carried themselves with an air of effortless elegance, Meghan and Harry understood that elegance alone would not shield them from the subtle machinations of this elite social ecosystem. Then, almost imperceptibly, the energy shifted again. Kris Jenner, observing from her strategic vantage point, prepared her move. The room, already humming with anticipation, tightened around Meghan. Guests instinctively paused, sensing a pivot in the evening's dynamics. And as Meghan caught Kris's gaze, a subtle smile, controlled, deliberate, and perfectly timed, hinted at the next moment of confrontation. The air seemed to hold its breath. And then it happened. The words fell like a knife cutting through champagne bubbles and polite laughter. "You can't sit with us." Have you ever had a single sentence drop into a room and change everything? One moment, the evening is a sparkling celebration. The next, it feels like the world has tilted on its axis. That's exactly what happened when Kris Jenner's words hit Meghan Markle like a cold gust of wind. "You can't sit with us." It was delivered with that trademark Jenner poise, a smile that didn't reach the eyes, a tilt of the head that was subtle but full of intention. The phrase, simple as it was, carried layers of meaning. On the surface, it could have been dismissed as a playful jest, a casual nod to pop culture humor. But in that charged environment, with cameras capturing every flicker of expression, every whisper in the room, it became a public declaration. Meghan is the outsider. Meghan does not belong. The room froze for a heartbeat. Guests who had been engaged in light conversation suddenly became silent observers. Some smirked politely, masking amusement. Others leaned slightly closer to their friends, exchanging knowing looks. The energy shifted. A phrase meant to exclude had amplified into a spectacle. Meghan could feel it immediately, the familiar tightening in her chest, the sudden awareness that every micro-expression she made was under scrutiny. Imagine that, a room filled with Hollywood elite, a royal couple standing at its center, and yet one casual remark rearranges the social map of the evening. Meghan's mind raced. Was this a joke? A subtle test? Or a deliberate power move designed to unsettle her in front of an audience that thrives on observing every sign of weakness? And then came the realization. In Hollywood, as in royalty, perception is reality. And this perception was being crafted meticulously, with Kris Jenner as the architect. Prince Harry sensed it too. His eyes flicked between Kris and Meghan, noting the shift in her posture, the tightness around her jaw, the barely perceptible flare of her nostrils. Harry had witnessed Meghan endure public scrutiny, tabloid attacks, and endless commentary on her demeanor. But this was different. This wasn't a press release or a staged interview. This was real-time social maneuvering, designed to provoke a reaction. And it was happening in front of the cameras, in a space where every reaction could be amplified to millions. The contrast was striking. Meghan, a woman trained in diplomacy, protocol, and poise, standing in a room designed to test influence and social agility, faced a situation where elegance alone couldn't shield her. The guests who had been observing the exchange were now more attentive. Some tried to laugh, uncertain whether the comment was meant in jest or as a subtle attack. Others stayed silent, sensing that something significant had just occurred. And the tension grew. Kris's delivery was key. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make a dramatic gesture. She didn't need to. The words themselves, paired with her controlled smile and the calculated cadence, carried enough weight to dominate the room. It's a tactic that only someone of Kris Jenner's experience could employ, using minimal action to maximize psychological impact. And it worked. The room, which had been a flowing mixture of light-hearted chatter, suddenly became a stage for scrutiny, for judgment, for unspoken evaluation. Meghan's reaction was immediate, yet controlled. A sharp inhale, a subtle stiffening of her shoulders, a blink that seemed to slow in time. She was acutely aware of the cameras, the guests, Harry, and most of all, herself. This was no ordinary slight. It was a public assertion of power, and Meghan instinctively recognized the stakes. Every move she made next would be recorded, dissected, and analyzed. She couldn't afford to respond rashly. Yet the internal surge of anger and disbelief was undeniable. Think about that for a moment. You're in a room of some of the most influential people in the world. Every detail is captured. Every gesture carries meaning. And one sentence changes your entire experience. What would you do in that moment? Smile politely and let it slide. Respond with wit? Or assert your presence in a way that cannot be ignored? Meghan's mind was a storm of options, weighing strategy against emotion, loyalty against instinct, and dignity against the urge to respond immediately. The atmosphere thickened. Guests shuffled slightly, some unsure whether to intervene, some watching to see how Meghan would react. And in the background, Harry's hand found hers, a grounding presence in a room that suddenly felt like a minefield. He understood the message behind Kris's remark, but he also recognized Meghan's capacity to handle herself, the fire and intelligence that had brought them both through countless public challenges. Yet even he could sense the shift in the room, the way the balance of power had subtly changed with a single phrase. What made the moment even more intense was the subtle interplay between visibility and invisibility. To the casual observer, it was a simple joke. To those who understood power dynamics, it was a masterclass in social influence. And to Meghan, it was a challenge, one she could not ignore. Every guest watching knew that her response would signal her standing in this world. Would she fold, maintain composure, assert dominance, or retreat? The uncertainty added layers of tension, turning the birthday celebration into a psychological battleground. And then there was the context. Kris Jenner is not just a host. She's a strategist, a media savant who understands narrative, optics, and timing. She knew exactly how to orchestrate a moment like this, where inclusion and exclusion intersected perfectly with the lenses of the cameras. The phrase, "You can't sit with us," was deliberate, a signal to the room and a test of Meghan's reaction. It was designed to generate whispers, headlines, and viral attention, all while positioning Kris as the undisputed queen of the gathering. Meghan's mind, sharp and trained, quickly processed all the signals. The subtle smirks exchanged by nearby guests, the slight pause in conversation around her, the quick glances toward Kris, assessing whether this was playful or pointed. She recognized the psychological architecture of the moment and knew she had to respond with precision. Any misstep could be amplified, distorted, and remembered long after the night was over. Harry, ever the observer, felt the tension crackle like static electricity. He understood the stakes. This was not just about Meghan's reaction, but about the subtle assertion of influence in a space where perception equaled power. His protective instincts were immediate, but he also recognized the importance of allowing Meghan to navigate the challenge. Any overt intervention could backfire, undermining her agency and the very dignity they both sought to preserve. And the guests, caught between curiosity and discomfort, began to whisper. Some tried to laugh it off. Others remained silent, waiting for Meghan's next move. The room was in suspended animation, a carefully constructed drama unfolding with Meghan as the central figure. And as all eyes lingered on her, the unspoken question hung heavy. How would she respond? The contrast between Hollywood's social dynamics and royal composure had never been more evident. Meghan, who had endured relentless public scrutiny, tabloid narratives, and the pressures of royal life, was facing a new arena, one governed not by protocol, but by influence, perception, and the subtle assertion of social dominance. And in this arena, Kris Jenner had delivered a masterstroke. But Meghan's reaction, while calm on the surface, was a storm beneath. Every muscle in her body was tense. Her thoughts raced, considering options, calculating potential outcomes, balancing dignity against emotion and strategy against instinct. And Harry, watching silently, understood that whatever happened next would set the tone for the evening, and potentially, for the media narrative that would follow. And just when it seemed that the tension might plateau, Meghan made a subtle move. A slight shift in her stance, a recalibration of her posture, a micro-expression that suggested she was neither intimidated nor defeated. But what she was planning next would shock the room, Harry, and everyone watching from behind the cameras. The moment hung in suspended time, the air charged with anticipation. And in that instant, one thought dominated Meghan's mind: I will not be dismissed. But what came next would escalate the evening beyond what anyone could have predicted, and the drama was far from over. Have you ever felt the kind of anger that simmers quietly beneath the surface, the type that no one can see, but everyone around you can somehow feel? That was Meghan Markle in the moments following Kris Jenner's sharp remark, "You can't sit with us." On the outside, Meghan's face remained composed, her posture flawless, her smile intact. But inside, a storm was building, a fire fueled by humiliation, disbelief, and a profound sense of injustice. It started as a tightening in her chest, a familiar physical reaction to the kind of public scrutiny she had faced countless times. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and her eyes narrowed just slightly, barely noticeable to anyone not looking closely. But Harry noticed. He had seen that expression before, a silent signal that Meghan's patience was fraying, that her mind was racing at 100 miles per hour. What exactly was running through her mind in those first few seconds? A tidal wave of questions, indignation, and calculation. Was this a joke? Was it calculated? Was she meant to be humiliated in front of Hollywood's elite? The subtlety of Kris Jenner's delivery only amplified the insult. It wasn't loud. It wasn't over the top. It was just precise enough to sting, calculated enough to provoke, and subtle enough that anyone trying to dismiss it as playful would be lying to themselves. Meghan's fury was not the kind that erupts in shouting or dramatic gestures. No, this was controlled fury. The kind that sharpens the mind, focuses the senses, and makes every subsequent action purposeful. She knew that any overt reaction now could be used against her later. The cameras were still rolling. Social media eyes were everywhere. The entire world was watching, whether they realized it or not. One wrong move, and this moment could dominate headlines, memes, and whispers for weeks. But the fury was there. It simmered beneath the surface, a current of emotion she could not ignore. She felt the weight of the insult not just for herself, but for everything she represented: her dignity, her family, her position, and her very identity. The sting was personal and public simultaneously, a double-edged assault. And as Harry remained silently supportive beside her, Meghan's mind raced through options, strategies, and potential consequences. Have you ever noticed how anger can sharpen awareness? Meghan felt every detail of the room with heightened clarity. The placement of the guests, the way some shifted subtly in their seats, the way the cameras had caught that micro-expression on her face. Every small gesture now mattered. Every pause, every blink, every breath carried significance. She could not afford to falter, yet she was acutely aware of the injustice that had just been delivered. The internal dialogue was rapid, almost overwhelming. How could someone wield power so effortlessly in a room full of people, yet deliver a slight that cut so deep? How could one phrase, spoken in a measured tone, reverberate across an entire gathering, changing the dynamic in an instant? Meghan had endured media attacks, public misinterpretation, and royal scrutiny, but this calculated social maneuver in the heart of Hollywood was different. It was intimate in its humiliation, yet public in its reach. Harry whispered a few words, subtle and protective, but Meghan was beyond simple comfort. She was analyzing, planning, strategizing. She replayed the exchange in her mind, examining Kris's posture, tone, and timing. There was no mistake in the delivery, no accidental misstep. It was intentional, an understanding that made her fury more precise, more focused. She knew she could not respond rashly, but she could plan her next moves with meticulous care. The anger was not just directed at Kris Jenner. It was directed at the situation, at the room, at the invisible forces that sought to define her, categorize her, and challenge her place in this world. Every Hollywood observer, every camera lens, Every whispered assessment of her presence was a reminder of how carefully she had to navigate this environment. Meghan had always been aware of optics, of influence, of public perception, but the intensity of this moment was unparalleled. There was also an element of disbelief. How could someone deliver such a public slight with such casual poise? How could a birthday celebration, a night meant for joy, become a minefield of social power? Meghan had been taught, both by royal protocol and personal experience, to measure reactions, to control composure, and to maintain dignity. But this was Hollywood, and Hollywood had its own rules, subtle, invisible, and unforgiving. The control of her fury became a skill in itself. She took deliberate breaths, allowing the initial rush of adrenaline to settle into a calculated awareness. Every muscle in her body was tuned to observation. Her eyes scanned the room. Her ears caught whispered comments, subtle laughter, and the almost imperceptible sound of shifting attention. Every nuance was a signal, every reaction a clue. Meghan understood that this was as much a battle of perception as it was a battle of presence. And yet, the fury had a purpose. It was not blind anger, it was a strategic tool. Meghan knew that patience, awareness, and measured responses were more powerful than immediate confrontation. She allowed the heat of the insult to fuel her observations, sharpen her focus, and heighten her understanding of the dynamics around her. This was not simply about reacting. It was about asserting control in a world where subtlety often wields more power than direct action. Harry sensed it, too. He saw the controlled fury, the deliberate calculation, and the resolve forming in her eyes. He knew that Meghan's response would set the tone for the remainder of the evening. He also knew that the stakes were not only social but personal. Any misstep, any show of weakness, could be magnified and replayed endlessly in media cycles, social commentary, and public perception. Harry had always been protective, but he also knew when to step back and let Meghan navigate her own battles, especially when those battles required intelligence, grace, and restraint. As Meghan processed the insult, she considered the audience, the celebrities observing, the media watching, the cameras capturing every micro-expression, and even the guests whispering among themselves. She understood the psychology at play, the subtle demonstration of power, the assertion of hierarchy, the manipulation of perception. And she knew that responding too quickly could play into Kris Jenner's hands, but responding too passively could be interpreted as weakness. The internal strategy was taking shape. Meghan's fury became focused into a series of calculated decisions. Observe, measure, and respond at precisely the right moment. She would not allow humiliation to dominate the narrative. She would reclaim control in a way that maintained dignity and authority. Every glance, every gesture, every micro-expression would be purposeful. Yet, beneath the strategic calm, the emotional undercurrent remained. There was shock, frustration, and indignation, the human response to being publicly dismissed in a room where every eye counts. Meghan felt it all, but she also knew that the key was channeling that energy into controlled, impactful action. It wasn't enough to simply endure. She had to assert, to respond, to reclaim space in a world that thrives on exclusion and subtle dominance. And as the minutes ticked by, Meghan's internal storm began to crystallize into intent. She knew she would not be ignored. She would not be dismissed. And she would ensure that the balance of power in the room was acknowledged on her terms, not Kris Jenner's. But even as she prepared to assert herself, she sensed that the night had only just begun. The real challenges, the deeper dramas, were still ahead. And what came next, the private confrontations, the shifting alliances, the media storms, would push both her and Harry to the limits of composure and strategic brilliance. But what Meghan was planning next would shock everyone in the room and change the course of the evening in ways no one could predict. Have you ever felt the weight of someone else's storm and realized that no matter how prepared you are, you're only partly in control? That was Prince Harry that night, standing beside Meghan Markle as the tension thickened in Kris Jenner's mansion. He had anticipated scrutiny, yes, but not this kind of silent, meticulously orchestrated attack. The words, "You can't sit with us," had landed, and suddenly the air was charged, every guest a potential observer, every glance a potential spark. Harry's first instinct was protective. He had been trained for this in different forms all his life. Navigating royal protocol, absorbing public criticism, shielding loved ones from media scrutiny. But Hollywood was different. Here, influence was invisible, hierarchies were unspoken, and power was wielded with subtlety that could slice just as sharply as a headline in The Sun. He understood immediately. This wasn't just a comment. It was a social maneuver designed to unsettle Meghan and, by extension, him. As he watched her, Harry saw the familiar tightening of her jaw, the controlled lift of her eyebrows, signals he knew all too well. Meghan's mind was already calculating, strategizing, balancing emotion with diplomacy. But even as he recognized her composure, Harry felt that old, familiar surge of protectiveness. He wanted to step in, to deflect, to absorb the blow himself. But he knew that doing so openly might undermine her power. The night demanded subtlety, an approach that relied on observation as much as intervention. Harry scanned the room. Every guest was a potential actor in this social drama. Some laughed lightly, masking their curiosity. Others whispered with a calculated caution. Every movement, every micro-expression, was a thread in the intricate web of social influence that Kris Jenner had woven. Harry's experience taught him to read these threads quickly, but even he was struck by the precision of Kris's timing, the subtlety of her dominance. This was strategic genius at work, and he knew Meghan had already recognized it. Have you ever been in a room where every glance feels loaded, every pause seems deliberate, and every gesture could be misinterpreted? Harry felt it now, and he understood, in a way that only someone who has lived in relentless public scrutiny can, that the stakes were enormous. The slightest sign of weakness, hesitation, or distraction would be amplified in the eyes of Hollywood, the media, and, inevitably, social media. And yet, standing beside Meghan, he recognized her strength, her capacity to navigate this exact pressure with grace, intelligence, and poise. Still, the protective instinct could not be ignored. Harry noticed subtle shifts in guest behavior, a flicker of amusement here, a sidelong glance there. These were not overt acts of aggression, but the kind of calculated observations that could destabilize someone unfamiliar with Hollywood's unspoken rules. And while Meghan processed the insult internally, Harry's mind was calculating external variables. Who could be allies, who might exploit the moment, and which dynamics could spiral into public spectacle. The contrast between his life in the royal world and this environment was stark. In the palace, protocol is explicit, traditions codified. In Hollywood, the rules are invisible, subject to interpretation, and enforced by subtle social cues. Yet, despite the unfamiliarity, Harry's instincts were razor-sharp. He felt the room's tension in his chest, every unspoken message a data point he cataloged silently. He understood the impact Kris Jenner's words had on Meghan, and he understood that her response would be a signal not only to the room but to the cameras, to the media, and to the public. Harry's attention was also divided by the microcosm of observation around him. Influencers on their phones, paparazzi capturing discreet flashes, and elite guests trading silent cues, all of it layered upon the immediate dynamic between Meghan and Kris. Every subtle shift could be turned into a story, a viral moment, a meme that would outlast the party itself. He realized that this wasn't just a social slight. It was an event with consequences extending far beyond the mansion walls. And yet, Harry remained a calm center amidst the storm. He offered a subtle hand on Meghan's back, a grounding gesture. But he refrained from intervention, recognizing that Meghan's ability to assert herself on her terms was paramount. He had learned, through years of scrutiny and experience, that true strength is often measured by restraint. Letting her navigate the social labyrinth herself, even while standing by, was sometimes the most protective choice of all. Have you ever watched someone you care about face a public challenge and felt powerless to intervene without making it worse? That was Harry. Every instinct screamed to protect, to shield, to act. But he also knew that any overt move might signal weakness, suggest dependency, or allow Kris Jenner's maneuver to dominate the narrative. The room was a stage, and the actors were many. Every word, every look, every pause mattered, and Harry had to calculate his moves as carefully as Meghan did. He observed subtle shifts in guest dynamics as Meghan moved through the room. The guests who had initially been casual observers were now attuned to her reactions. Some offered smiles that seemed slightly strained, Others leaned in, whispering to each other. The atmosphere was no longer celebratory, it was evaluative. And Harry felt the weight of every gaze, every judgment, every silent calculation that could influence the night's trajectory. In that environment, he recognized a dangerous contradiction. On one hand, he needed to protect Meghan and assert loyalty. On the other, he needed to allow her autonomy and dignity. Intervening overtly could undermine her presence, but remaining passive could be perceived as complicity in the slight. It was a delicate balance, one that demanded both awareness and patience, empathy and strategy. Harry's mind flickered to the larger implications. Beyond the mansion, the cameras, the social media, and the whispers, this event could shape perceptions for weeks. Headlines could distort context, tweets could amplify microexpressions, and memes could reduce complex dynamics to a punchline. He understood that every subtle choice mattered, not just in real time, but in the aftermath, as the world interpreted and reinterpreted the night's events. And yet, amidst the tension, Harry found reassurance in Meghan's controlled fury. He recognized the signals, the way she absorbed the insult, analyzed the room, and considered every option before responding. He understood that her strategy would be precise, intelligent, and deliberate. He trusted her instincts honed over years of public scrutiny, media manipulation, and personal resilience. But as Harry observed, another layer of tension crept into the room. Kris Jenner, ever aware, had not finished her maneuver. The subtle smirk on her face, the calculated positioning in the crowd, suggested that there was more to come, a second wave of psychological pressure designed to test both Meghan and Harry, individually and as a pair. And Harry realized, with a flicker of apprehension, that the night was far from predictable. The storm was building, and Harry understood that he was not just a spectator. He was an active participant in the delicate dance of power and influence, tasked with safeguarding Meghan while also allowing her autonomy. Every glance he cast, every subtle gesture of support, every micro-expression he managed to control would influence not only the room, but also the narrative that would emerge after the party ended. And just as he thought he had a handle on the tension, a subtle shift occurred. One of the guests leaned slightly forward, whispering to another, a small but perceptible act that reignited the scrutiny on Meghan. Harry felt it immediately, the way the room seemed to pivot in microseconds, the collective breath held in anticipation of her next move. He knew that whatever Meghan decided now would define the trajectory of the night, and possibly shape headlines for the days to come. And in that instant, Harry realized something that chilled him. The evening was no longer just a birthday party. It had become a psychological arena, a subtle battlefield of power, perception, and influence. And whatever came next would challenge not only Meghan but also him. Their composure, their strategy, and their very ability to navigate a world where every word, glance, and gesture carried weight. But what Meghan did next would not only shock the room, but also force Harry to reconsider his role in this unfolding drama, and no one in that mansion was prepared for it. Have you ever been in a room where the smallest comment feels like a seismic shift, where one sentence changes the energy, and suddenly everyone is waiting for a reaction? That was the scene after Kris Jenner's pointed remark, "You can't sit with us." The words hadn't just landed on Meghan Markle. They had rippled outward, creating subtle tremors that coursed through every corner of the mansion. In Hollywood, whispers travel faster than champagne, and gossip is a currency more powerful than cash. That night, Meghan had just become the epicenter. The room had shifted. Guests who had been casually conversing now watched with heightened attention. The energy was no longer playful or celebratory. It had become a tension-filled tableau of observation. A laugh here, a tilt of the head there, a raised eyebrow subtly hidden behind a glass of champagne. Each small movement was a signal. Everyone was gauging the Duchess's response, trying to decipher what she would do next. Would she fold? Would she assert herself? Or would she create a ripple that none of them could anticipate? Whispers started almost imperceptibly, quiet enough that a casual observer might have missed them. "Did you hear what Kris just said?" one guest murmured to another. "I think Meghan might actually walk out." Came another sotto voce, barely audible. And then the ripple spread. Groups of 2 or 3 would exchange quick glances, as if silently debating the implications. The words had traveled faster than the champagne bubbles. Meghan noticed, of course. Every subtle cue, every glance, every micro-expression was catalogued in her mind. She was aware of the whispers, the smirks, the subtle shifts in posture, and the tiny adjustments of guests to watch her reaction. The room, in effect, had become a social magnifying glass, and she was under its lens. Have you ever felt that pressure? When a crowd watches not just your face, but the smallest twitch, the tiniest nuance of reaction. That pressure is intoxicating and terrifying. And it wasn't just the whispers among the guests. The cameras were still clicking, flashes punctuating the silence, capturing every micro-moment. In Hollywood, a facial expression can become a meme. A brief smile or twitch of an eyebrow can be dissected endlessly on social media. Meghan's poise, while impeccable, was now being read, interpreted, and analyzed by every observer in the room, every influencer with a live feed, and every journalist waiting for the narrative. The whispers had multiple layers. Some were curious, almost conspiratorial, speculating about Meghan's reaction. Would she confront Kris, leave gracefully, or assert her dominance in another way? Others were more judgmental, interpreting her pause, her measured response, as uncertainty or weakness. And yet another layer existed. Genuine empathy from a few guests who understood what it was like to navigate a high-pressure environment under scrutiny. All these currents collided in the same space, creating a dense atmosphere of anticipation. One of the subtle but most powerful reactions came from the group seated near the main table. Influencers and A-list celebrities, positioned strategically by Kris, whispered among themselves, their words almost invisible to the untrained ear. "She's handling it well for now," one murmured, an acknowledgement of Meghan's poise mixed with a hint of doubt. Another added, "I don't think anyone's ever seen her in a room like this before." The duality of observation and judgment was palpable. Meghan was being assessed not just for etiquette, but for power, adaptability, and presence. Prince Harry, of course, was acutely aware of these reactions. He scanned the room like a general surveying the field of battle. Every whisper, every glance, every subtle gesture was catalogued. He knew the room's dynamics were shifting minute by minute, and that Meghan's next moves would determine how she was perceived not only that night, but in headlines, social media commentary, and celebrity narratives. Harry's protective instincts were active, but he also understood that intervention had to be subtle. Overstepping could undermine Meghan's authority or feed the gossip fire. And the gossip did not remain contained. Small bursts of conversation, initially private and hushed, spread like wildfire. A comment made in one corner of the room might reach the far side of the hall within minutes. Hollywood operates on this kind of exponential communication. A joke or slight observed by one guest can be whispered to another, shared on social media, amplified by influencers, and eventually become a headline. Within moments, Meghan had not only endured Kris Jenner's public slight, but had also become a focal point for speculation and social evaluation. The emotional effect of this whisper network was immediate. Guests who initially felt neutral about the situation now took sides. Some subtly aligned themselves with Kris, perhaps seeking to curry favor with the host. Others observed Meghan, measuring her reactions for strength, confidence, or signs of fluster. And a few quietly wondered how a royal accustomed to centuries of protocol would handle the volatile, rapid-fire social world of Hollywood influence. And then came the micro-shifts, the subtle recalibration of proximity. Guests adjusted their seating, leaned slightly closer or farther, and positioned themselves to observe Meghan's reactions without appearing overt. Every movement was a dance, a carefully executed negotiation of social positioning. Those in power understood that observing without interfering is itself a display of influence. Meghan, acutely aware of these maneuvers, catalogued them all, her fury tempered by the precision of her focus. Harry noticed these shifts, too. His gaze alternated between Meghan and the other guests, silently monitoring both the whispers and the audience's perception. He understood the room's psychology as much as the social hierarchy. Every small motion mattered. Every microexpression was a data point. And Harry knew the potential consequences. Misinterpreted glances, amplified gestures, or minor missteps could all cascade into viral speculation, headlines, and gossip cycles. Meghan, meanwhile, remained calm externally, though internally, her fury burned brighter. Every whisper she overheard, every subtle smirk she caught, was fuel for her strategic thinking. She processed not just the insult, but the entire ecosystem that allowed the insult to take root. Hollywood operates on optics, influence, and narrative. The public slight, the whispers, and the positioning of guests were all interconnected pieces of a larger social puzzle. Meghan was already thinking 5 steps ahead. And yet, despite her strategic mindset, there was a human element at play. Humiliation is visceral. It hits the chest, the gut, and the mind simultaneously. Meghan felt the sting, the injustice, and the pressure of being evaluated. The whispers amplified the impact. Each soft-spoken word, each side glance, each subtle shift in the room's energy felt like a personal evaluation of her worth, influence, and place within this elite world. As the party continued, the whispers grew louder and more layered. Some were subtle assessments of Meghan's reaction. She's keeping her composure, but I wonder how long it will last. Others speculated on Harry's response, noting his quiet observation and protective presence. And behind it all, Kris Jenner's influence loomed like an unseen hand, guiding attention, framing narrative, and manipulating perception with surgical precision. And then, just when it seemed the room's tension had reached a plateau, a new wave of whispers erupted. Someone, a well-connected influencer with a live stream, murmured something about Meghan's reaction being calculated or planned, instantly adding a layer of public speculation to the already charged atmosphere. Now, the whispers were no longer confined to the mansion. They were seeding a narrative that could spill over into social media, tabloids, and celebrity gossip, turning an already tense moment into a story that could dominate headlines in hours. Harry felt it. The room's energy had shifted from mere observation to active speculation. Meghan's private fury, her controlled poise, and her strategic thinking were all being scrutinized by an audience far larger than the room itself. And Harry understood that the stakes had just risen. This was no longer a private encounter. The whispers and gossip had made it public, and every next move could define not just the evening, but potentially the perception of Meghan's role in Hollywood for weeks to come. And as Meghan processed the whispered commentary, as she measured each glance and micro-expression, she knew one thing with certainty. The night was far from over, and the real drama, the confrontation, the escalation, the showdown, was still ahead. But what Meghan decided to do next would leave the entire room, and Harry himself, stunned, reshaping the dynamics of the night in a way no one could anticipate.